So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu the prophet, we always ask why then Israel has destroyed its prophets. And let's then understand some of these areas of Yeshayahu as pointing obviously to the future and explaining of the Messiah himself. And then reading from Yohanan, for instance, when then the Messiah was explaining as far as bearing fruit, or then speaking of him. It's very amazing of so many thousands upon thousands upon thousands of videos and some understanding of presentations, and then people who are around the world speaking of the Messiah. And it is some sort of amazing. A lot of people, when they speak of the prophecies, they don't tend to talk exclusively of the Messiah himself and then the layers thereof. In other words, explaining of the Messiah as the very person being credited with the entire understanding and counsel of the holy instructions. You find lots of people explaining the prophecies, but then they take upon themselves being the authors and the interpreters of the holy instructions, rather than giving the Messiah the entire credit for not only being part of the holy instructions, but being the completion of the holy prophecies. So when the Messiah was explaining as far as the completion of the spring feast, for instance, the Messiah himself was the very person whom the prophet was pointing. At times when many people explain the prophecies, they tend to be the people who are understanding the prophecies as authors of these understandings rather than pointing the Messiah. The very Messiah is the person interpreting via his Spirit. There is a huge distinction from only speaking of prophecies and pointing the Messiah as the completion and the very point and target of the holy instructions. Some people, they tend to compare the Messiah with themselves. Some people, they say, oh, if the Messiah was able then to obey the instructions, so we can also obey the instructions as the Messiah did. And truly there is no comparison, not even as close as having this sort of understanding. The Messiah is always on top. He is the completion. He is the very person who gave then these people, the Shilishim, or then the apostles, understandings of the layers of what the prophets spoke of. So there is an absolutely huge distinction from explaining the prophecies versus giving the Messiah the credit for the explanation of these holy prophecies. And he said, bearing fruit. As far as bearing fruit is then understanding the prophecies and showing other people where the Messiah then is involved with. So then, some people, they think it's complicated explaining these prophecies, but it is on the contrary. It is somewhat easy understanding if we give him the credit. If the Messiah is given the credit every time, in any place, in every conversation, in every video, he is always the center focus, then the prophecies, they explain themselves. Understanding the mysteries of the holy instructions becomes easier. because the person deserving the credit receives. Thus, then, we have salvation, understanding, and we understand then the spring feast, autumn feast, post-autumn feast. We understand the prophets and the holy feasts in Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. In Hebrews, we understand the holy cities. We understand the future and the past. Now, when the Messiah is not mentioned as the very core of understanding, then the situations, they became obviously very obscured. So then, next time I'm going to talk more of these, because extremely important during this time of the restoration period, whereas there are so many people involved with explaining that 1,000 years of the Messiah is yet to come. It's an absolutely a lie from the pit of the inferno. And how we go about these situations? How can we explain that 1,000 years of the Messiah is already gone? The 1,000 years of Nehushtan is already gone. And we are during the time of the restoration period. So then the cities laid waste for many centuries would once again only indicate the Gentile world what to do by their own choices. Either the nations can do it, or they don't have to do it. And then obviously the restoration of the first holy city and the 7 cities of Asia Minor, and then the straightening out of, or the strengthening of then Jerusalem with the tent of Moses. And then the Messiah then comes then in the sky, and then showers the shower of sulfur. And there are lots of people who are making such a huge mistake, combining then the atomic bombs and combining then the second death with then the shower of sulfur. Some people, they make such a mistake by speaking of these mixture of atomic bombs, and they don't even understand what Shimon spoke of. That the elements of the earth then, with a fervent heat being burnt, is not the same as the atomic bombs. So then the coming of the Messiah then is a very specific point, and these must be enlightened by the prophets themselves. Now, if people, they want to credit for themselves, then the information is never going to be given straight. That's why there are thousands upon thousands of people speaking of the Messiah, and they make such a mixture. And then people don't understand. They are involved with lies in areas that they should not be taught. So later on I'm going to explore more of these, in the enlightenment of the Messiah being the very core of our lives and what we teach. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.